Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about Amazon's new released Fallout series based on the long running computer game franchise of the same name. This show is a very recent release, only less than 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to note up front that I'm going to do my best to avoid any plot spoilers that aren't already apparent from the show's own trailers. So you can watch this video fairly safely, even if you haven't finished the show. And the show begins in Los Angeles in 2077 AD, in a future United States where futuristic technological conveniences like robot butlers coexist with a cultural embrace of 1950s fashion and design. At least they didn't copy 1950s racism, I guess. Now, perhaps the 2070s fascination with the 1950s stems from a particular worry that they both had in common: nuclear apocalypse. And people in this universe should be worried because this time the doomsday clock is not going to stop until it hits midnight. 2 centuries later, Lucy McLean lives in Vault 33, a hermetically sealed underground facility whose inhabitants are waiting for Reclamation Day, the moment when it is finally safe for them to open the vault, return to the surface, and restore American civilization to the blasted wasteland that they expect to find. But things in that wasteland aren't quite what Lucy and her fellow Vault dwellers imagine. Civilization of a sort, several competing visions of it, in fact, has already emerged. One of these is the Brotherhood of Steel, an autocratic insular group that use their existing stockpile of pre war technology to keep such equipment out of the hands of others. An orphan named Maximus is among the Brotherhood's lowest ranks, but he has ambitions to rise, and by a good dose of luck and circumstance, he may have an opportunity to do so. And then we have Cooper Howard, a big screen star in the pre war world who, thanks to the dubious benefits of hard radiation and experimental drugs, has become what the Wastelanders know as a ghoul, a cadaverous mutant who can die pretty much only by violence, but who is more likely to be the death of anyone who tries to kill him. Now, events outside of any of the control of these three characters will soon set them on a collision course, and the outcomes of their meetings may change the Wasteland forever. So, as I noted earlier, this series is based on a video game franchise. The first Fallout game hit stores in 1997, and it has been followed by three numbered sequels and a half dozen other spin offs, of which the most highly regarded is probably 2010's Fallout New Vegas. Now, I've played all four main Fallout games, as well as New Vegas and two of the other spin offs, so it's safe to say that I'm something of a fan of the franchise. So when the show was announced, I was nervously excited. Excited because, well, I'm a fan of the franchise and hoped it would be good. And nervous first because, well, it might not be good. And second, because a subset of Fallout fandom are notorious for hating everything that isn't their one true Fallout and vociferously complaining online about anything else. And those people are still out there. There's been a collective effort by some of them to actively post spoilers for this show online in an attempt to sabotage its chances of success. Now, those efforts seem to have failed. The show has received overwhelmingly positive reviews, it seems to be pulling good viewer numbers, and it has been renewed for a series 2. The failure of this spoiler campaign pleases me, partly because I don't want spitefulness like that to be rewarded in general, but also because I think the show is a good one, not perfect, very few things are, but definitely good and worth your time to watch. But let's unpack some more details, shall we? So Lucy, Maximus, and Coop aren't the only significant characters in the show, but they are kind of the core trio of the advertising campaign, and with good reason. It's their respective journeys that drive the program's core events. As a trio whose agendas and adventures often intersect with each other, they're an excellently chosen and diverse group. I don't just mean diverse in terms of their mix of genders and ethnicities, though I'm pleased to see the show isn't centered around a handsome 30 something white guy, but diverse in terms of their experiences, outlook, and perspective. Lucy, Maximus, and Cooper were all born and raised in very different worlds, and they've all been through very different experiences. Those different worlds and experiences are reflected in the actions they take, the choices they make, and their approaches to the challenges they face. Each of the three has very different ways of engaging with the world and a different set of expectations and beliefs and values. Those differences create tensions and dissensions between the trio as they swing in and out of each other's orbits. Importantly, the show also gets two other things right about the characters' different points of view. The first is that it's consistent in how they're depicted. by the end of the 8 episodes, you'll probably have a decent idea about how each of the three will react to a certain situation, because the decisions they make are consistently in keeping with their established characters. And for that reason, the show gets its second thing right, because character decisions are driven by who those characters are. They're not always the tactically best decisions, and which of the three is right, or at least choosing the most effective approach in each situation, varies from case to case. This ends up making the trio not just contrasting with each other, but also complementary. Each has a different perspective, but those differences really help the overall tone and structure of the show come together coherently. It's very well put together. Now, the Fallout franchise has long embraced elements of satire, gonzo comedy, and black humor. How successfully it has integrated those with its broader themes has varied. This is perhaps inevitable given the structural challenges of a long running video game franchise. Not only have the games had dozens of different writers over multiple decades, but those writers have also needed to cater for players who might choose to play the game as if they were a Lucy, or as a Maximus, or as a Coop, or as one of a host of other different types of characters, and the gamers need to accommodate all of that. The show, meanwhile, has much more control over its own narrative and the themes it expresses, and I think it does a really good job of taking the Fallout thematic framework and evolving it in coherent, consistent ways. I also think it does a pretty good job of taking some of the game's less coherent elements and contextualizing ways that actually give them a clear purpose that fits within the worldview of the characters who drove the decisions. I'm not saying that the worldview of those characters is necessarily one I approve of. In fact, quite the opposite in many cases. But the program does show how those characters would see this decision as beneficial for themselves. What's in it for me is a pretty basic human response. And it's good to see the show recognize that and explore why some of the on the surface goofier elements of the game's lore may have come about. Now, while not every single plot point development in this show will be met with enthusiasm by fans of the franchise, hence that Spiteful Online spoiler campaign I mentioned, I do think those plot points all make sense in the context of the world building, and I don't think they in any way ruin what has come before. So, obviously, I really enjoyed the show. Do I have any complaints at all? Well, I mean, of course I do. Really, it's just the one. I think the first episode is a little too long. It runs 74 minutes and a little bit too deliberately paced. Things were foreshadowed for longer than needed. There are at least two separate occasions where I was thinking the first episode, yeah, it's 110% clear what's going to happen now. So maybe we get on with actually having it happen instead of continuing to slyly nudge about it. I got to the end of the first episode feeling a little bit less excited about the show than I was when I started that episode. But by the end of season two, that had changed. The pace picked up pretty quickly, and its full hour-long runtime flew by. And from that point on, I felt things maintained a really good rhythm. Now, yes, in some part, my enjoyment of the second and later episodes come from my glee at seeing the aesthetics of Fallout's wasteland so lovingly recreated for the show, and mostly in physical effects, it just makes it feel much more real and immersive. For instance, there's a scene where Lucy explores a derelict building, and it really did feel like I've been there in the game. Everything about the setting, the fading wallpaper, the kitchen cutlery, the clock on the wall, were things I'd seen again and again in Fallout games. And the show doesn't just look right, it also sounds right. The soundtrack sounds like it's straight out of the games, both in terms of the 1950s bands whose songs are used and in the modern instrumentals. I did literally squirm with pleasure when they finally hit the iconic Fallout sting in the soundtrack. Now, if you're not familiar with the games, you might be wondering, will the show work for you? And based on my wife's reaction to the program, I think the answer is yes. She's never played a Fallout game. She's not particularly a science fiction fan, but she very much enjoyed the show and has said that she's keen to see season two when it arrives. So yeah, despite the squawking of a few spiteful online dude bros, the Fallout TV show is an excellent program and it's well worth your time. Next time, the success of the Star Wars films inspired many imitations. Among the worst of those is the 1979 stinker Star Odyssey. So that's something to look forward to, isn't it? But that is next time. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you've seen this show, let me know what you thought of it.